So here we are with Kim Krause Schwalm,
Yeah,
and
good job.
and Kim Kim has been a copywriter for at least 20 years. She worked with Phillips Publishing, which of course was a giant in the field, both financial and health stuff. And Kim, like me, you have been doing this since print days, and
Oh yeah.
and are still doing it now in the digital age. So and we have a bunch of things that we could talk about today, but I thought maybe a good place to start would be just to give us a little bit more about your background, um, the marketing background, and everything else.
Sure. So I was always a marketer that could write copy. I had like maybe 13 years of corporate marketing experience before I became a copywriter back in 1998. So it was a pretty bold move to just kind of walk out of my really well-paying corporate, marketing job and be like, "Hey, I'm going to be a freelance copywriter." But obviously, in retrospect, I think it's one of the best decisions I ever made, for my career. And I think what, I always loved about direct response and copywriting is that everything is so measurable. It's not,
Mm.
you know, theoretical. I mean, there's definitely the creative part and the analytical part, which I love. I actually have a bachelor's degree in math and stats and an MBA in marketing. But the fact that results are measurable and everything can be tested, I just like the clarity of that. Maybe it is. Yeah. So I was very lucky to join Phillips Publishing back when it was just really taking off and growing, and they were primarily a financial newsletter publisher, and they were probably like at least 5 times bigger than Agora was at the time. Like they
Oh
were
yeah,
they were one of the big companies, and they worked with the very, very top copywriters. I mean, Gary Bencivenga, Jim Rutz, Clayton Makepeace, etc. Really great copywriters. And I joined right after they launched Health and Healing, which was the first alternative health newsletter. And Clayton Makepeace had written just a killer launch package that was mailing in the millions of pieces. And they
right.
had almost, 300,000 subscribers within a few years. And these are paid subscribers. So that was a, pretty big deal. And so I was brought in to help figure out what else we want to sell these people on the back end. We had all these people who wanted to follow his advice, and he wrote about supplements, he wrote about all sorts of different health products. And so we were constantly testing. Like I would come up with an idea or negotiate a joint venture deal with somebody who had an alternative health product, write up an insert, and we just put it out there and just like test. And Bob King, who ran that division, always encourage people to take risks. He's like, if you're not failing enough, you're not trying enough new things. And that is such a powerful business philosophy for anything. So many companies create environments where people are afraid to take risks, they're afraid to fail, but then you never move forward with that next breakthrough. You never get to that. And that so plays over into copywriting as well. But it was just a fantastic place to work. We had some winners, we had some losers with the inserts. What we found that people really wanted was Dr. Whitaker's own supplements. So I was asked to help launch a supplement business. I did this after only being there like 6 months. We got it up and running in like 3 months, and we were selling his core program, and we started just adding other supplements and just strictly going to his list, to back end list. Within 3 years, grew that to $23 million in sales a year. And that's like 38 million in today's dollars. And it was all just using a lot of the things that people call fancy things now, but it was basically just recency, frequency, and monetary value. Tell people something
Mm.
else, or sell them more of what they bought. Like it's the same kind of stuff people talk about with funnel strategy, but that's basically what we did. And, sell them right out of the box, do this, do that. And we just had, it was just a really fast growing, thriving business. And it was just a lot of fun. And then from there, I went to work with Margie Ross. I don't know if you know Margie. She's an amazing publisher.
Mm.
Worked with her with Jay Abraham and Dennis Waitley. And then I worked to help launch a couple other health supplement lines with Dr. David Williams and Dr. Christian Northrup. And then I launched my first child. And then I came back, and I don't think they really knew what to do with me. It was like I was working in the investment side for a while. And at that point, I was starting to think, I've always been thinking about this freelance copywriting thing. I see the kind of lifestyle, like Peter Balowski had left a few years prior. He was one of my former bosses. I was like, he's like doing really well. I talked to Doug Deanna. He'd be like, yeah, I work like
Right.
maybe 20 hours a week. I'd be like, all right, you know what? I think I can do this, So I took the leap. I I lined up a really great retainer arrangement that would only take half my time and guarantee me 90% of my salary. And I took the leap. And then from there, I just, just got clients, mostly people referring me. And then once I got a few wins under my belt, I just never had to really worry about finding work. So it's been a great journey, and I'm so glad I
Right.
took the.
Now, so Philips is no, I'm not sure what the status of Philips. Are they no longer around, or they're in parts
No,
that are still
no,
around?
they
No.
broke up into all sorts of different parts.
Right.
Divisions got sold off. Healthy Directions is now owned, I think, by, I want to say, some kind of investment firm, but for a while they were owned by Helen of Troy, who had them for a few years. Helen of Troy is a major,
Right.
company with, retail divisions. And yeah, so it's not anywhere what it used to be, but the time that I was
Sure.
there and for several years after, it was all run by Tom Phillips. Bob King
Right.
led the consumer division, and it was just an amazing company to work for.
Sure. Well, I mean, at that time, because at that time I was working at Agora, and Agora was very small and was growing. But
Hmm.
we had binders full of Philips promos, and we're studying them. So I know all
Yep,
the promotions that you mentioned. I know I can see the cover in my mind, and all the other
absolutely.
stuff and
Yep.
elements that were in the promos.
We had
Uh,
Agora ones hanging up on bulletin boards in the hallway too.
oh, that'd be interesting. Be
Yeah,
interesting.
don't you miss those days when you could just put a promo up on the wall? Now it's all on the computer.
Well, I think it's interesting also that when we would try to train new copywriters, because then and now copywriters were hard to come by. In-house copywriters were even harder to come by because you had to train them from scratch.
Yeah,
And the big guys were either too expensive or taken up by somebody else and had a year of bookings. Um,
probably Phillips.
yeah. Uh, so with the way we would train them before we knew about training programs, I know you mentioned that some of these training programs, they just didn't exist then. There wasn't anything
Oh
like it.
yeah, there
And
wasn't.
the way you learned was studying other people's copy.
Yeah,
So at Agora, we would put copywriters, and I would say like proximate copywriters, people who didn't necessarily write copy, but they really had to know copy and how it worked. Would be in a big room, and we would trap those poor people there for hours while we just used one of those projector things that they have in grade school, put it up on the wall, and talk it through page by
right,
page. And we would just do that, we one after the other. A lot of those were Phillips promotions.
right. Well,
So
yeah, it's a good way to
yeah,
learn. I mean, it's really one of the best. And sitting in so many marketing meetings and management meetings at Phillips, everybody would talk about what was working, what wasn't working. Here's a new copy angle that's really hot, like on this promo. And so I really did start to understand the strategy. And at the same time, Phillips liked to hire people who were marketers who could also write. I mean, it wasn't an absolute requirement because there were some people who mostly did list selections or things like that where it really wasn't anything to do with copy. But if you were like a marketing manager on track to rise in the company, and you also had the skill that you could write copy in addition to doing all the other stuff, that was, those were the people who tended to do very well at the company. And so I
right.
had the opportunity, that first position, I was doing my marketing hat, but also writing the little promotional inserts to go out and see, how they were doing. And I remember writing one for an air purifier. They were, well, can we sell a $400 air purifier as an insert in a newsletter? And I did so much research. They even flew me up to Buffalo, New York in the middle of winter to see how this thing was made. And I wrote a 6-page insert that did really well, And so having some successes like that, it gave me the opportunity to do the Healthy Directions business. I just wrote all the launch inserts, that just took off. And then just, I built a whole team of I had like probably 10 or 11 people, and some of them would write copy too. So we were doing some of that copy training in-house, but for the big acquisition stuff, we go to get the big guns, and Phillips was
Right.
not afraid to spend the money and invest it. I mean, if they were paying a copywriter $1 million a year in royalty, that meant they were making probably at least, 15 or
Sure.
20 million. So,
Sure. And
the
that's
more
the
they
case of
paid them,
right.
and that's, you know,
And later we're going to talk about. We'll make
absolutely.
sure before we finish, we're going to talk about finding clients, royalties, and things like that. I did want to say, ask you. So fast forward to now, um, and you've been a freelancer for a while, I guess,
22 years.
22 years. So Phillips is gone in parts, and you gained certainly a lot of momentum by building your name with Phillips and among that crowd. Um, Now we're in a different era. What do you think about that market for what is the supplement market like? What kind of stuff are you writing now? I guess supplement or health or financial, maybe both.
So,
Um,
yeah,
and
finish.
and then the other part, I don't know if it's too soon to transition into this stuff, but at some point maybe like how you get clients now. And another question that just came up while you were talking:
Gotta
how
start writing these
how
down.
right, how you stay current with what's working now, because I think copywriters all develop their own method to study what is working and keep track of that. You know, we have our clip file just keeps, or our swipe file keeps growing. So how do you do that? What's your process for that?
Okay. Wow, that's a lot
So
of
that's a
questions.
lot. Take your pick. Take
Okay,
your
so I'm going to start. I'm going to try to remember the beginning one. So I've primarily written mostly supplement promos, but I've written for
pick.
health books. I've written financial. In fact, some of my early successes were with financial. I did a lot of work with KCI, which I think now is under a whole different name. And one of my big wins was getting the control for their flagship newsletter, and beating Jim Rutz's control. And then I was hired by Brian Kurtz up at Boardroom to go up against Paris Rampropolis's 7-year tax hotline control, which had been unbeatable. And I was able to beat that and became the first female copywriter to get a boardroom control. So some of my early big wins were financial, but I had the strong supplement background. So I kind of straddled both for a while. And then I think it was around 2007, 2008, I realized, like 80 to 90% of what I was writing was health. And so every time a financial project would come along, I'd be like, oh my God, what's going on now? I got to get back up to speed. And I made this conscious decision, I'm just not going to write financial anymore. And then it was kind of funny because like 4 months later, it was like the big financial crisis. And, all the financial cooperators I knew were like, oh my God, they stopped milling my controls and I'm not making any money. I was like, ooh, that was good timing. So I've almost exclusively done health since, although I have more recently dabbled with some financial copy. And so that answers that. I'm almost forgetting all the other. So as far as what I'm doing now, I'm primarily focusing on my own training and mentoring programs. And I'm only working with a few of my favorite clients right now, in terms of mostly keeping existing controls alive and doing new tests on them. And actually, there's been a lot of activity there the last few months with coronavirus, which, as you know, we found a lot of the products have a lot of these immune and lung health benefits that we want to bring to the forefront. So, that's something that's been working well. But I would say at least, 70 to 80% of my time is now on my training programs. I have a group of 12 people that I'm mentoring and, those kinds of things. So I finally made that decision just a few months ago that, at least this is what I'm doing now. I'm almost fully focusing on this and not doing like new client work. Not to say that I'm closing the door to that forever, but after 22 years, I was like, you know what? I've been kind of trying to do both for the last couple of years, and I don't want to work that hard. So, and this is really bringing me a lot of joy right now. Although this morning I was just working on some copy again, for one of my controls to do a test. I'm like, I really still love doing it. I'm digging in like, oh, there's some interesting study tidbits here I can use. So I still really enjoy it, but
Right.
I don't enjoy we could go on about what we enjoy about being copywriters and what we don't enjoy. I don't enjoy the feeling of, feeling you have to prove yourself all over again, maybe with a new client. Or, I mean, again, usually people know me, or they already come to the table like, hey, we respect you, we want to work with you. But, I think we all remember what it was like, when you're just starting out and you always have to kind of prove yourself. And sometimes, people are, they don't treat you as well.
Right.
And it's nice to just feel more in control when you're just selling your own stuff. You're in control. You're not sitting there wondering, okay, why haven't they put that promo out? It's been done for 3 months. I can just like write an email and sell my products and move on. So I like
Yeah.
that sense of having control over my own stuff.
I think that feeling when you're writing copy, that feeling never quite goes away.
Yeah,
It's a little bit like being. I don't want to, I don't want to equate copywriters with rock stars, but when you're a musician who's got a record going out, this is
yeah,
something that Bill Bonner of Agora once said to me. He's like, "Yeah, it's tough because you are as good as your last hit. That's it." And I mean it. That's not necessarily not completely true. Anybody who's been in the business for a while knows that people are going to write a certain percentage of everything they do is not going to work.
right.
Um, and
Absolutely.
and uh, you can take some comfort in people knowing that that's the case. But then when something you've worked on doesn't work, it still feels terrible. To me, it does.
Oh,
I
absolutely.
yeah. And I when something is working, uh, it's definitely a boost, uh, personal boost that helps you get
Absolutely.
momentum for the next project.
I mean,
So
I
I just say that because I think it never goes away, really.
when you say it never goes away, I mean that joy, that feeling of
Sure.
creation and coming up with an idea and kind of
Right.
seeing where that takes you, where that, I recently just wrote about that in an email to my list, and it probably sounded a little woo woo, but it was like the subject line was like, "I see you, magical seed," and it was about that whole process of, the artist's approach, like let it
Mm,
tell you what it wants to be. I mean,
right.
there's this whole process where I spend a lot of time on research, and I like doing most of it myself because that's where I start to make all those connections that Gene Schwartz talks about,
Right.
and then it's like, wait, where's that going to lead me, and that's where you sometimes get these big ideas and these not at all directly connected to the product, but there's a story there that you can tie in, like a promo I did a few years back for Newmarket, where it was like the twin astronauts, and this anti-aging story that tied in with the supplements. So there's so many examples where you kind of got to give yourself a little bit of that creative freedom to find it. And I guess one of the things that drives me a little crazy is, there's, and I think you and I are very classic. I guess classic is a way of saying we've been around at this for a while,
Right.
but we remember like this. We're a business of ideas, and if you have a big idea, like read this or die, like Jim Rutz's
Mm,
alternatives promo, which like literally brought in I think 100,000 subscribers and built an entire business. Like these are powerful. And yet what we've seen, at least in the earlier days of online marketing, is sort of a devaluation of the importance of copy. Oh, there's all these other things that are more important. Well, honestly, it's that message, it's those ideas that I think are still so
right.
valuable. And you get a lot of good enough copy that can it's good enough to do what it needs to do, but it could be dramatically better if people weren't always trying to rush through and get something done in 3 days and kind of bragging about how quickly they can do that. And it's like there's this whole process where it just kind of, you find that magical seed.
Right.
Where is that going to take you? And
Well, I always thought it was an interesting example that just pops into my mind while you say it, and I think some of the people who see this might be familiar with it. Was a promotion that somebody for Agora put out that did very well, which was this End of America promotion
oh yeah,
around the time of the market crash,
right.
um, and a little bit afterward. And um, that, of course, was a huge hit, and that was written by mostly by copywriter Mike Palmer, who
Yeah.
is an Agora a guy bred all the way through the Agora thing, trained there, and excellent copywriter, nice guy, and partly by Porter Stansberry, whose product it was for. Um, and when it went out and when it was huge, there were some circulating emails about how huge of a phenomenon it was, about how it had been written in like 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Um, though that was the mythology that went around for it. So I finally wrote to Mike and I said, Mike, how how long did it take to write? It's because somebody's telling me it took you only about 3 weeks. He said, no, absolutely no way. He said, I started it a year ago. I wrote some version of it that took me a couple of months. It didn't work at all. I rewrote it. I went back to it. I said the version that I have here probably took about maybe 3 months to get
Mm-hmm.
it right. And then I had CC'd Porter on that, and Porter said, "Well, he said that's true. And Mike did all the writing on this on the version that's out there, and he totally gets credit for what worked. However, we've been shaping this idea for the last 2 years. So,
Yeah, that's,
um,
and then
you
the
know,
result
say,
was this, and it was, I mean, people hopefully on this call, listening, I mean, that was just an amazingly successful promotion for
yeah,
quite a while. It had really long legs.
yeah.
And yeah,
It
I
did
like
very
that.
well, and the timing helped. It landed right at the right time for that idea. But it was the point about the idea though was that it was so that so much had gone into crafting it, and that in the end it was the idea.
Yeah. And sometimes they do require that. But sometimes I'm not saying you can't write good copy
Quickly,
fast.
sure,
I I mean, some of my most successful promos, if it's usually it's been like a combination of maybe procrastination and just other things popping up. And, I usually try to allow 4 weeks for that process, like between the research and then
right,
writing that first draft. I like to allow 4 weeks in my schedule, but then there's usually always other things going on. And then like there are times where it's like, oh my God, I'm like 2 weeks behind even starting this thing. But if I spend a good solid week on research, that I can write the full, long form promo. And again, for a supplement, because I've done so many of them, I can get that done definitely within 5 days. But it's because it
mm,
depends on having that research done.
yeah,
The research and having the idea very clear, and here's where I'm going to go. But if you just start
right,
writing, you could just sit there for like months going, I don't know where I'm going with this. So you really got to have,
sure,
I think the research is so important to spend time on it. So when someone says, I can write something maybe in 3 days, it's like, well, I mean, it took me 3 days just to do the basic research.
yeah. Well, I also think there's that old axiom about the car mechanic who comes up and he kicks the tire and it fixes the sound in the car, and the guy says, and then he charges him $150. He said, $150? All you did was kick it. And he said, yeah, but it took me a few years to get to that point where I knew just where to kick it.
Right.
Um,
Right.
I think that you never know when that seed is
Mm-hmm.
going to show up,
Right.
and it might be fast growing. It might be 3 days, but it might take a while.
Right.
So it means you have to constantly stay plugged in, and it also means that you have to figure that just because you did write something in 3 days and it worked, you're not going to be writing something in 3 days and having it work every time.
Right.
So,
Exactly.
and overall, I think what it's really saying is you got to respect the process, because that big idea is still remains the core of the process even now.
Yeah.
Um, and even when
More
you see
so now.
people, more so now, and when you see people
Yeah.
rushing something out, um, the thing that works best is still the one with the big idea at the middle.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what bells and whistles they
You
attach.
got to stand out. I mean, it's harder than ever to stand out. It
Yeah,
used to be that we were mostly just competing against whatever was in the mailbox, which
right.
are now more empty these days. But now, I mean, you go on social media, you go online, you're just constantly bombarded with, oh, click here to find out about this crazy thing, this weird trick for, lowering blood sugar. And next thing you know, you're watching a video sales letter. I mean, there's
Right.
just so many distractions. So you have to stand out with something that's going to stop somebody in their tracks and get them to pay attention to you and keep them paying attention to you. So, yeah, I think
Right.
being good at writing copy and doing the research and coming up with the ideas, it's the same no matter what medium you're writing for. And I think it's more important than ever today if you want to have copy that's going to stand out and be able to compete with everything else that's out there.
Right. So before we turned on the recording of the camera, we were talking a little bit about that, and I was asking you, having been doing this back in the days of print and in the '90s, and then there have been transitions, all the digital stuff. Of course, that's not new news anymore. It's been around for quite some time. For now,
Okay.
the majority of both of our careers have been in a digital realm. It seems like every year to 6 months, that's the footing is changing under
Mm-hmm.
the way that things are marketing. Nowadays it seems like the marketers are as important as the copywriters in their input, and the different things that people talk about doing and mastering and funnels and all that other stuff
Right.
is all part of the conversation. What do you think about that? Do you, what's changed? What's the same? What's your position on all that stuff?
Well, it just reminds me of one of the other questions you had asked. It kind of ties into it. Like, how do I keep up with things and what's new and what's being done? And part of that, at least until COVID came along, was getting out pretty regularly to conferences. And, one of the things I think the best copywriters and marketers are always learning and even just relearning, even as stuff you've heard,
Right.
they're always curious and learning. And it's also a great way to meet potential clients. Um, but yeah, I think what you and I were talking about earlier is if you understand direct marketing principles and copy principles, I mean, so much of this, whatever has this new buzzword or name attached, and oh, you've got to get up to speed on funnels, and I'm a funnel expert, and blah blah blah, and it's like, it, I was doing funnels back in the 80s working for Blue Cross Blue Shield when I'd go over and say to my telesales department, hey, you want to make sure you cross sell this and you upsell this. And I mean, that's a funnel, like a funnel is basically, do you want fries with that? Right. I mean, it's obviously there's a whole lot more to it than that. And there's a lot of data. We have so much data now. You have to understand how to analyze the data. But there's a lot of fancy new names given to concepts or strategies that are just, direct marketing. You know what I mean? Like sponsorship emails. It's like, I remember when you used to actually send a direct mail from Geico would say, this is our colleague so-and-so, and they have a really great life insurance plan. I mean, that's basically
Right.
a sponsorship email, So there's so many things that have just, you and I have seen, over time, become online. And I remember even, I had invested a couple grand of my own money. That was probably like 8 years ago anyway. I went to do a one-day video sales letter workshop with a very well-known copywriter who sort of invented the VSL. And then right around that time, one of my clients, SoundView's Advanced Bionutritionals, had just taken like a couple of my current control direct mail pieces and literally just had them made like word for word into video sales letters. Like, I mean, we're just
Mm.
talking exact copy, and they were working great. So I'm kind of like, really? Like, I have to learn this whole, I'm listening to this whole structure. I'm like, well,
Right.
this is how I write a sales letter. I mean, there are certain things you do. Like you want to, you want to make sure you're selling them on readership basic, which you kind of do in copy anyway. Like, here's why you
Mm.
want to keep reading, right? In a moment, I'm going to reveal blah, blah, blah. But you kind of do that at the beginning of a video sales letter so that it's very important that you watch till the end of this presentation. I mean, it's just different words, but it's the same stuff that we've been doing in sales
Right.
copy, with long copies. So I just think that I love that example because it's just, there's so many things. And yes, there are ways to perfect it and optimize it and know how to read the data. And there's a whole skill set there. And I don't mean to diminish that, but just in terms of the concepts, like, is anything really, really that new? I mean, maybe artificial intelligence or the neurochip that Elon Musk wants to put in everybody's brain, maybe that'll change things, in 5 or 10
Right.
years. But I honestly think most of it is just really the classic principles that, you and I have mastered for years.
I think it would be, and maybe somebody's already done this. I think it would be a great service for somebody to do a comparison of old classic. I don't know if you're familiar with Lawrence Bernstein's
Yes.
info marketing stuff. He does like ads from the 20s and 30s. He does a lot of Eugene Schwartz stuff, and
Yeah.
um, like things that people would say, "Oh, well, those are so dated; they can't possibly work anymore." But those people had jobs, children, health concerns, financial concerns as well. The
Yeah.
environment that in which it happened was different, but and maybe the way that some people talked was a little bit different, but their motivations were very similar to what they are now.
It is. Human nature doesn't change.
Right.
I mean, and that's what we're writing to. I mean, like if you look on my wall here, I've got like, I remember when I first started copywriting, I found these old ads that I found interesting and relevant, and I framed them and put them up there. And it's almost like that reminder that, yeah, just see this, the
Well,
elements of copy, when writing to people's solving their problems and what's on their mind and enter the conversation the prospect's having in
right.
his head and all those things. It's so true today. I mean, none of that changes.
Well, I'd heard that the guy who launched, um, I'm trying to think of one of the, it wasn't Upworthy, it was one of the clickbait when people were talking about clickbait articles with the titles that you just couldn't
Oh yeah,
resist.
like BuzzFeed or something like that,
It,
or
it might have been BuzzFeed. One of the founders of that has framed on his wall. Um, they laughed when I sat down at the piano,
yep.
but when I get band to play, uh, I forget who that was. But he
What's that?
said, yeah, he
Show
said
and tell. I just happen to have it right there.
he said was the ultimate clickbait headline, and that was written in 1923.
Right.
So. Um, but there certainly are aspects of marketing today where you can get your feedback instantly, or you can
Oh yeah.
find, where we used to be buying lists of names, which were literally reams of paper or computer disks of names. Now there are different ways to gather names and things like that, and I think it's good for copywriters to understand at least how that works.
Absolutely.
Um,
You should totally, I mean, that's why like I said, I go to conferences regularly. I
right,
keep up with what's going on. I subscribe to newsletters that I finally get around to reading sometimes on email marketing. I keep up with it as much as I can. And you're right, we have that instantaneous or almost instantaneous feedback that we can get that we used to have to put something out in the mail and wait till the doubling date, to figure out like
right,
if it's going to work.
right,
And it'd be like 12 days out, oh, postage delivery is a little slow. We may not get a read for another 3 more
right,
days. And now what I'm doing with some of my existing controls is we're going out testing a new email, which we did for one of my controls recently. We found that just the email alone got a 33% lift in revenue. So now we're going to take that and adapt it to the lead, not just on the sales page, but also there's a direct, actually one of my clients, I don't have it handy, they still do a lot of direct mail.
mm-hmm.
So this one promotion has been going really well for almost 3 years now, and they sent it out direct mail. We're going to test it with what we tested online with the email. We're going to put that into the headline and the lead and see how that works. And so yeah, it's kind of like online to offline, and you can get the quick test, and then it kind of reduces the risk of doing a more costly direct mail test.
Right.
And so yeah, there's a lot of ways to use it. And yeah, funnels are, basically upselling and cross-selling and, downselling. And it's important to understand the lingo. I mean, I remember when I first, several years ago, was starting to write more online copy, and people would ask me to do something, and I literally had to Google, so what is that? Like somebody said, oh, we're going to need a few, God, what was the term they use for basically the emails, swipe emails. We're going to use some swipe emails.
Right.
I'm like, what are swipe emails? And I had to Google it, and it's like, oh, it's
Right.
just one of those things you give somebody when they're going to be endorsing your product, and you give them I'm like, yeah, we used to call that such and such like 10 years ago, so everybody's got like their new names, and you got to keep up with the, the
Right.
terminology so that you can at least come across like what you're doing. I mean, or you just fake it and then you go Google it
You
later
fake it. Yeah, that's
privately.
it. At least you got the Google now. Yeah, well, I
You
think when
can Google everything.
I started working with Agora, and at the time the only copywriter was Bill Bonner around the company, and then he hired me and was training me to write copy.
Wow.
Um, and he said a couple of years into working there, he said, "Oh yeah, we had tried to hire somebody." For some position. I can't even remember what it was, a assistant publisher or something like that. And during the interview, they had asked him if he knew what a monarch envelope was, or something like that. I can't even remember the
Right,
correct
right. Monarch
terminology.
size. A monarch size. Yes,
Yeah,
I know
monarchs.
what it is.
Well, I didn't. And he said he didn't even know what it was, so we didn't hire him. Can you imagine that? And I laughed, and I was like, no, I can't believe you didn't know what it was. And then I desperately had to go try and
Right.
find out what it
You
was
didn't
because I
have
had no
Google.
idea.
You didn't have
And I
Google.
didn't have Google.
Oh my
So,
gosh. Yeah, we
yeah.
actually lived before Google, guys. Anybody
Yeah.
listening?
Oh yeah, I had to go to the library and take out things on microfiche to do research.
Yeah, I remember when Netscrape.
Yeah.
Called derisively Netscrape. Anyway.
Um, yeah. So, but terminology like that gets. I think some of the terms are they're reinvented monthly. Like you'll as soon as you find out what they are, somebody's calling them something else.
Well, it's a marketing
So,
thing.
yeah.
We're marketers. We understand how it works, right?
Exactly.
Um,
So let's before we wrap up, because I know you have to go soon, but I did want to ask you about, now you've been freelancer for 22 years, about what kinds of advice you might have for people who are um, maybe both sides, if it's not too much to ask. People who have a small business, they're looking to find a copywriter, how to make sure they get a good copywriter, and maybe for people who are newer copywriters, how to get clients. What's the best way to find clients?
okay, so I think the best way to find clients is to get really good at writing copy. And I don't know who actually came up with this quote, but be so good they can't ignore you. And so
Mm,
part of that is, you know, reading all the classic books, and people know what they are. But like Breakthrough Advertising by Gene Schwartz. And I mean, the first two books I read when I left Phillips, became a freelancer, were Scientific Advertising and My Life in Advertising. And
mm,
they're just as relevant today as they were, 80 years ago, however long ago they were written. Um, and then if you have opportunities to study successful promotions, I mean, I have swipes. I still get swipes. I file them all over. I've got stacks of promos. I keep them filed on my computer, when I get good emails that I like and or that are going to interesting sales pages or VSLs. So, study successful promotions. And the more you learn about copywriting, through different courses and programs and you're reading, and then you can start to analyze exactly why people are doing what they're doing. And that's pretty much how I got into it. Like, I knew enough coming out of Phillips about it, but I had never written a long form promo, and I had to just study the heck out of these things. Like, how do they do this? And then I would get some project, like, okay, I don't really know what I'm doing, but I'm gonna like look at the structure and look at this and apply the strategies and then just start figuring it out. And so one of the things I'm doing right now is I have a copy teardown masterclass that I'm doing with people, and it's going for another 5 weeks. And I'm breaking down, like, in detail, like, successful controls that I've written, like, each week. And so when you have those kind of insights, I think you can apply that. And then the better you get at writing copy, you will find clients. You need to put yourself in positions to find clients. And unfortunately, we can't get out to conferences now, but there are some virtual mastermind groups that I recommend, like Brian Kurtz's Titans Accelerator group. It's actually pretty affordable. And Kevin Rogers has a group called Copy Chief, which is
mm,
very much like a community for copywriters, and they're always posting jobs there. So like when I was starting out, like, I just needed to get my samples together. I needed to have some things. And I remember once one of my first clients, I finally convinced him, hey, you should try testing a Magalog. He was like a guy who did, I don't ever hear of Dr. Batman Jellish? He passed away many years ago, but he wrote a book called Your Body's
familiar.
Many Cries for Water. And he would sell these programs, like videos and etc. And to make a long story short, I did his first Magalog for a low flat fee, but I had my sample. And then
Mm,
a supplement company called me and said, hey, do you have any samples? I had my one sample. I sent it to him. He hired me for 3 times as much. And next thing I know, I was writing supplement Magalogs, and
right.
getting some winners there. So you start with some smaller projects. Maybe they're not so glamorous, but it's like the step ladder approach. And then you start to have some wins and successes under your belt, just like I did when I went to Phillips and I got that air purifier win. Next thing you know, they're like, oh, can you launch a company for us? Okay. So, that's how you open the doors. But it's very much a process. It's understanding copy and being willing to go deep into understanding why it works. It's not just, oh, I'm just going to do this magic formula, and copywriting is this easy thing I can do sitting on the
Right.
beach. It's like, no, it's hard work, and you got to put the work into it. And when you prove that you can do it, it's a lot easier to find good quality clients.
Yeah, I think what what people who are new to copywriting are not so much aware of is that there's a conversation that when something works, people say, "Well, who wrote that?" So that comes
Exactly.
up.
Oh,
So you
for
write
sure.
something that works, and
They find
just
you.
one thing that works could help you find your next person, maybe your next couple of people, and it does start to snowball, and you do have to start refusing people.
Yeah.
So, which is the best kind of
Did
situation.
you want to talk about royalties? Because I can stay on. I know that was one of the things you, because there's
Yeah,
a lot of debate about royalties these days.
sure. Well, I know that we mentioned Clayton, uh,
Yeah,
who, of course, we all miss.
absolutely.
Clayton he had a very creative and successful structure for his business, which was not royalty based. Really, it was a percentage of the businesses that he helped, which is definitely a way to go, but a heavy hitter kind of thing that you got to prove yourself before you can do that.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so yeah, go ahead. Maybe talk about the different the ways royalties work and some of the chatter is these days.
Yeah, well, I mean, the way royalties worked and still work for those people who are doing direct mail. And like, I know people like Carly and Andre Cole who almost exclusively still write supplement direct mail promos, and she
Mm-hmm.
keeps super busy and rakes in lots of money with direct mail royalties. But the way direct mail royalties have always historically been structured is a certain amount per piece mailed. So the more that your client was able to successfully mail, like the bigger the numbers, obviously the more royalties you would earn. Because if it was a really strong package back in the day anyway, like we can roll out to 1 million names, with this,
Right.
we can go properly to lists that a weaker package maybe would not be able to go to. So then, but what we've run into, unfortunately, with direct mail is just there's not as many names to mail. And so royalties have been hit hard, although I still have some promos that are consistently almost every month bringing in some pretty nice direct mail royalties. And a lot of these are businesses that already have like a pretty big house file that they mail to profitably. But yeah, the list world, at least in health and supplements, is not what it used to be 5 or 10 years ago. So, many of your royalty deals are going to be with online marketers. And so what generally is the standard there is a percent of either gross or net sales. And so that, it's a pretty direct tie-in, obviously. So if your supplement promo is generating, $1 million in sales every quarter, and you're getting, say, 4% of that, that can be a nice chunk of change. So, but that's generally how they work. I mean, that's a very oversimplified view. There's a whole lot of, pieces and things you have to,
Right.
ins and outs. But the way that you negotiate those with clients, I mean, there are some companies that that's generally how they work, and they like to work with copywriters, is that whole idea of shared success. And they also know that, especially at the top level, if they want to attract top level copywriters, people like me will only work on deals where there's royalties, included. And I never work on just royalties only. It's always a fee plus royalty, because I
Right.
don't think a copywriter should take on 100% of the risk with their time and work, and then the client may never even mail it. So, there has to be some of that. But, the way you sell it maybe to a client who hasn't done it is, you're going to be there for them when that headline starts to fatigue, or when that email starts to wear
Sure.
out, or something new comes along like coronavirus, like, hey, Kim, I think you can come up with a new angle. Yeah. And I'm not going to charge them for that. I'm going to jump on that. That's at the top of my list now. And boom, they just got a 33% lift in revenue. And guess what? My royalties went up 33%, everybody's happy. And so the more they pay their copywriters, the more it means they're making money. And I think it's just a great model. And I think there has been some resistance in the online marketing world. And I have some speculation. I can't really say exactly why, but I think that it's a missed opportunity, because, otherwise you just have people just turning in copy, and then you have the copywriter kind of loses control of it. And then they might have their in-house people tweaking it or doing these different tests, or someone else and it's like, the person who was like so close to it and so passionate about it for the
Right.
month or so they worked on the copy, like they can come up with those fresh new angles and ideas much more so than
Sure.
some junior level person that you just throw on it. And you know what I mean? So I think there's a
Sure.
lot of
And
that.
often they've in the process of writing. I mean, I'm sure I keep stuff that I move off to the side of, like, future promo. I
Yep.
could do it with
Yep.
this or whatever, and
Exactly.
that becomes something you can test in lift letters and space ads and things like that. So
Yeah, you should
um,
always write multiple headlines, multiple emails, all that while still fresh in your mind. That's something I
right.
remember the late Clayton Makepeace saying. He would always submit at least 5, covers, with a direct mail promo.
Right.
It's like, and the more they test, the greater your odds are getting a big winner.
Yeah. I did do that. I have for most of my career done that, submitted
Oh
multiple,
yeah.
like 5 or 6 at least. But I started to tone it back because I realized I was overwhelming them a bit, and I wanted to, so I keep some in reserve and say, I want you to try testing these 3.
Yeah.
And then if something hit, then I could come back and say, I've got a couple more test leads for you. But I definitely would have that material. And I like what you say about, with the royalty model, you do end up attending something that works. You want to keep it hot. So
Yeah.
you go in there and you're not going to say to somebody as a copywriter, well, I'll write those extra lift letters for you, but they're going to cost you this much
Yeah.
each, because it's crazy. You're like, you
Well,
want to make it
it's
as
crazy. They pay
easy
you
as
like tens of
possible.
thousands of dollars in royalties. Like,
Right.
why would you say, "Oh, that's gonna be $500"?
Yeah.
I had to
You
write a new paragraph.
Right. You want to keep it going.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
you certainly you can get into a situation where somebody is dragging their feet on copy, and they make you do 10 rewrites and
Sure.
things like
There's,
that.
that's another whole issue. Yeah.
Yeah, it goes a totally different direction. But
That's the kind of
I
problem
think also,
to
I,
avoid.
I know you tell me if this is familiar too. I think, copywriters who are still looking for clients, they think like, I'm going to need to pile up a huge client list. And that's usually not what happens. It's usually you have a few clients that you do a lot of writing for rather than tons of clients that you write for. Because it's easier to focus on the products, it's easier to manage what you're doing, and it's easier to keep the relationship with the person that you're
Yeah.
writing for.
Just on that, and that is a really good topic. I think you have to be careful though, because you don't want to only have one or two clients and
Right.
then something happens. You're like, oh damn, I just lost 50% of my business.
Yeah.
Um, so, I always used to look at it when I had full schedule, of copywriting projects that I was only doing copywriting, almost like an investment portfolio. Like I would have my cash cows. Like, if I do a couple of these SoundView ones, I always know I'm always pretty much going to get a control and blah, blah, blah. And then I might try a couple wild card ones. It's almost like you would
Mm-hmm.
have a mix ideally, because again, you're also looking at like, this is going to be generating it's not just the fees, but like potential royalties,
Going on future.
etc. And
Yeah.
obviously not all of them are going to be success, but so that's one way to take it. And then the other two other points. One is, I think that one way you get really good at copywriting early on is writing.
Yeah.
Writing, practice, right? So, I mean, just take on, don't feel like, oh, I have to niche right out of the gate. Like, just take on a lot of projects, get experience doing a lot of stuff, and you'll just start to get better. I mean, I have somebody in my mentoring group now that she's just been slammed with all these different emails, but it's like, you know what? I'm like, you realize your copywriting has gotten so much better just in 2 months. And I like to take credit for some of that. I think it's because she's been writing so much, so simply writing a lot is going to get you better. And then the other thing to think about is, I had a great advantage getting into copywriting, a huge advantage, because I worked at Phillips Publishing, which at the time was, one of the most respected companies. And I've actually encouraged people that I've mentored, and some of them have actually followed my advice and gone to work for big direct response companies for a while in-house, like people at Agora, for example, or some other companies big in the online marketing space. And that can just, as long as you don't sign your life away with, a non-compete, it's a great way to just, kind of get paid to learn and
Yeah.
soak up everything from people. So I think that can be, depending on your situation, just a really great way to get your start. I mean, rather than slogging it along alone, because sometimes that can be hard. So.
Right. And you feel all that is doable in the current climate that we're in, this bizarre uh, economic shift or lockdown, can't go to conferences, or was there anything you would add to that for this?
Well, like I said, I think there are virtual opportunities like the ones I mentioned with Titan's Accelerator through Brian
Right.
Kurtz and Copy Chief. There's ways to reach out. I think, just connecting with people where everybody's feeling a little isolated. So actually people are more accessible now. People have more time now. If you want to talk, pick up the phone, talk with a client that you haven't worked with lately and kind of check in with them. I mean, those would all be things you could do to kind of drum up more business. But I think the need for copy is even greater. I don't
Right.
think it's been hurt too much. I mean, it depends on what niche you're in, but I think a lot of the niches are doing very well right now, and there's some that
Yeah,
are
they
doing
are.
accurately. So it does create more opportunities, and there are companies who want to have in-house copywriters, or they want to have copywriters on retainer. So if you're looking for some kind of steady work with one client, I would just always say, kind of dabble with some others as well. Just keep, don't put all your eggs in one basket, unless you decide to go the employed, like in-house route for a while, and that's certainly a good way to go too. So
All right, that's good advice. Maybe we just wrap up. Could you? I'm going to ask you to send me a link to the things that you're doing. I know you're doing the
Yeah.
teardowns and things like that.
Yep.
Is there anything you want to mention to people who are watching that they should check out that we can put in a link underneath the video?
Yeah, sure. Well, the first thing is I'd like to encourage people to go to my website, kimschwalm.com, and you can get a free copywriting checklist. It's called the Ultimate A-List Copywriters Promo Checklist. It's
Right.
actually like 5 checklists in one, and has like a whole what you want in a start kit for a project, research, just checking all the different sections of your promo. And it's like a really useful tool, and that's for free. And then I have like a free mini course on 7 success principles for writing successful promos. So you get that when you get on my list. And then I do have right now, in fact, I just had a tear down on Friday. I have another one today. So I'll be tearing down 6 of my most successful, longest running supplement and health controls each week. And it's like the first one, we did like an hour-and-a-half call. And then you get all the recordings, you get like all the multiple promos, all the tests, etc., and then a whole list of takeaways. And then we're going to do live copy critique calls every other Friday. So the first one of those is this Friday. And we're all just basically be looking at people's copy that they submit and, focusing on the biggest needle movers and giving them feedback. So it's like a 6-week going deep, like, opening up, lifting. I don't want to say the kimono analogy because I think I hate that one, but, it's like really looking, why did I
Right.
come up with how did I come up with this headline, and why did I write this way, and like those inner workings that you don't
Under
always get
under
when
the
you're
hood.
looking under the hood
Yeah. Right.
versus
What else?
applying, like learning about how to write a headline. This is just takes
Right.
it to a whole different level. So it's a really interesting program, and right now most of it's being live, but everything's being recorded, so you can get in at any time and get access to everything that I'm doing there. So, and
Okay.
then I have a mentoring group, but that won't start again till January in terms of any openings for that. But
All right,
yeah,
great. Well, I will definitely put that contact info down there. Kim,
sure.
thank you very much for giving us the time and
Oh, you're so welcome. It's
very
good to
helpful.
talk with you.
And I look forward to seeing you someday at a
I know.
AWAI boot camp or something.
I hope so. I hope that happens soon.
All right, take care.
You too. Take care.